This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible by NYU-MEDIA.
Centuries after the events of RefleX, the third and final installment of the Tale of Alltynex trilogy tells the story of how humanity faces annihilation from the Kamui, an ancient weapon born of brain-fusing technology. Kamui is a fan-favorite doujin shooter, and likely for very good reasons.
Originally released by Cytoskane in 1999, Kamui features very swift gameplay and a shifted mechanic focus, featuring a pretty solid lock-on ability that pays homage to Taito's Rayforce series. Let's take a closer look. Kamui originally saw release to PCs all the way back in 1999, so the gameplay here is relatively simple. Standard 8-way control and typical rapid fire are once again at the core of the control scheme as usual. Your hitbox isn't especially well defined, but on the whole it's pretty easy to avoid most, if not all, enemy fire. Players can come up with a control scheme that works for them with any controller or keyboard setup.
Beyond the core movement and fire controls, players have access to a homing shot that spits lightning at enemies that are out of the reach of the regular shots further below them. The higher the charge, the more enemies can be locked on and fired at, which factors into scoring. We'll take a look at that later.
This technique is plenty powerful and makes short work of many of the enemies that are unfortunate enough to fall victim to it. Granted, the lock-on field takes up the entire screen, but some enemy formations are huge, and they can fire stuff up at you at an alarming rate.
On the same plane though, larger enemies and enemy bullets can be wasted by jamming both the regular fire and lock-on commands together, which results in a super powerful beam attack that also affects the lock-on gauge. Using this beam attack will also slow your ship down. Careful management of both of these gauge techniques is key to getting through Kamui unscathed.
Beyond the main control techniques, players can also upgrade the main shot and gain additional shield power through item drops. Paired with a life system that has both shield power and a life stock, Kamui gives players a fighting chance to seeing the end on one credit without being overly easy.
Given its age, it's no small wonder that Kamui can be played with maximum graphics settings and effects with zero slowdown. Its age paired with various settings also means it should run fairly well on much older systems, which is great because more people need to play this awesome doujin title.
As with RefleX, Kamui ends up taking its specific gameplay hook and making the game pretty fun to play through, and with a total of 6 areas and several difficulty levels, Kamui also has more than enough gameplay to justify its asking price. With the Steam leaderboards, there's even an extra layer of replayability that exists for high score chasers. Kamui's scoring is less about just destroying enemies and more about when to attack things below your ship at just the right time. Locking onto and destroying as many enemies as possible will net the highest scores, as the higher the multiple kill, the more the enemy's base score will be multiplied.
Perfect timing is critical in getting as huge a score as possible. Not only will you need to wait for as many enemies in a wave, or enemies paired with destructible shots, as possible to be present in your lock field, you'll also have to have a lightning attack charged up enough to destroy them all.
The lightning attack can also apply to bosses as well. Making a boss kill with the lightning attack will net players at least a 2x multiplier, sending the score way up.
Finally, collecting power-ups beyond maximum power also results in a 10,000 point bonus as well, so staying at full power for as long as possible will make for solid numbers. All of these pointers should help in cracking that Steam leaderboard.
Kamui Kamui has a presentation that's pretty great for the most part. Its 2D retro visuals are authentically chunky, but because of the use of PCM and MIDI sound only, the Steam version of Kamui may not be the definitive one.
On its first time round, Kamui probably looked much better on the old CRT monitors that would have been attached to most computers in 1999 than it does today. Like Reflex, the game has all kinds of super chunky pixels, which is fine by us, but there will be times when the chunk factor may be a bit too big. There are some elements that don't blend especially well either, but that's the nature of really early indie work from the 90s.
On the bright side though, everything in Kamui is very well animated with very little dependence on cheap rotation effects. The level of detail in Kamui also lends to its visual strength. There's some really great mechanical design, and all of the shots, bullets, special effects, and explosions work pretty darn well. Every stage also has a crap ton of parallax, giving them a decent sense of depth, even if some stage elements are a bit rough. Kamui also has decent UI throughout.
The sound is kind of a concern though. While the OST is well composed, the PCM sound version sounds a little shrill at times and the MIDI output is more or less unlistenable. Kamui does feature a CD sound option, but being that a disc doesn't exist with the Steam version, there's no Redbook audio to access as a result. The PCM OST is more than passable though.
Thankfully, the sound effects are well selected in Kamui, and once again, as with Reflex, there doesn't seem to be use of any of those typical doujin sound effects that you'd hear in your everyday Japanese indie title, a big issue we have in many other doujin titles such as Gundamonium and Gigantic Army.
As if this weren't enough, Kamui also has a Tate option, allowing anyone with a rotatable monitor to play Kamui in full screen with no wasted blackboard space.
Steam achievements were a feature that Reflex lacked, but they're here in Kamui just as they were in Alltynex Second, adding even more gameplay to the mix. So, Kamui is a slick shooting game from a lost age in doujin development and publishing, and it works really well in all respects. But how does it stack up? Let's take a look. Kamui's solid control works well for traversing enemy fire.
The fire commands can be just a tiny bit fussy though.
Kamui's difficulty will challenge players without overwhelming them.
Multiple difficulties allow players to scale the game to their skill nicely.
At 6 stages, there's a decent amount of gameplay in Kamui.
Kamui's Steam leaderboards add quite a bit of replay for high score chasers.
The 2D visuals work fine for the most part with tons of awesome parallax, but certain background elements are just a bit too chunky.
Background elements also clash just a bit too much, especially right at the beginning of Stage 1.
Kamui's soundtrack is pretty catchy and the sound effects work really well.
The lack of a CD sound option hurts, but the PCM OST is fine. The MIDI option is kind of awful though.
Taking a page right out of the Rayforce series, it's clear that Kamui's innovations are more or less an homage to Taito's series.
The alternate fire types and the bounce required to use them effectively are clever, but again, just a tiny bit too fussy.
Some call Kamui the original God-tier doujin, but while this could be debated, one thing is for certain. Ciderskane does it again with tight gameplay and simple but fun mechanics and scoring. The addition of Steam leaderboards and achievements for this version revitalized this classic shooter, which everyone should be checking out, especially if they only mildly liked Reflex and Alltynex Second. Kamui gets a 4.5 out of 5. You can grab Kamui on its own for $7.99 or as part of the Alltynex Trilogy Pack for $19.99 on many direct download services such as Desura, Gamersgate, Rice Digital, and, of course, Steam.